in some cases, some parents want the other parent to hear it.
Yeah.
They're like, you know what? I think this about them, and I want to make sure they know it. So I'm going to tell our kid.
Yeah.
And then the kid's like, well, I heard this from mom. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And then that when you go to that other parent's house, they're like so taken back of, why do you have an attitude? It's like, well, because I've been hearing this all week. Definitely watching what you say around your kid is like big, because that's going to later down the line cause that kid, like you said, emotional and psychological, like, problems.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I don't know how to healthily communicate that. I don't know what to say.
Your blended family has a 100% chance of success when you do it God's way. We're Blended Kingdom Families, and we want to provide biblical resources to heal and restore families with a message of hope for the next generation.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Blended Kingdom Families podcast. If you have not already subscribed to our YouTube channel or anywhere on Audible that you listen to, go ahead and do that, you guys. That way you can be notified every week when a podcast hits. And we're excited. We have Sidney back again with us. So if you were in tune last week, we were talking about the healthy things that co-parents can do from a teen or a young adult's perspective. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty and kind of like more of the negative things that co-parents do, and, you know, maybe give some advice on like what to do better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Okay.
dive in, Sid. I'm excited to hear.
Back on the same list from last week.
She made a list, y'all. She
made a list,
prepared.
T-chart and everything. Yes. Okay. Number 1, bad toxic parenting includes bashing the other parent.
Yes.
I can preach on this one. Bashing the other parent, saying, although there might be situations where you have a lot of bad things to say about that parent, coming from somebody who is on the kid's side of it, that is half of your kid. Like that parent that you're saying, oh, well, they're dumb. Oh, they only do this. Oh, they're not stable. That is half of your kid. And a lot of kids take it so personally because they're like, well, that's my mom or that's my dad. Like, does that mean I'm like that?
Yeah.
And so like a lot of people don't think about that when you're just talking and you're saying all these negative things about your kid's other parent. Like that is half of your kid.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you want those things upon your kid? Of course you don't. So why are you bashing the other parent about it?
Do you feel like kids find, because like they're half mom, half dads, right? Like that they find a source of identity, of self-identity from their parents. So like whenever the other parent is attacking their character,
absolutely.
that you're like, wow, if they think that about the parent, like what do they think about me? Or
Absolutely. Yeah. Personally, it came mostly from my mom bashing my dad and a little bit of both, I would say. But in the beginning, it was mostly my mom to my dad. And I was like saying all this bad stuff. I remember me and my dad used to get in arguments because of what I was hearing about my dad. I'm like, Dad, you did this and this and this. And he's like, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
And I'm over here 13 years old crying because I'm like, yes, you did. That's what I'm hearing you did. He's like, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
And then later on, it was just like, oh, well, it was just like the nitpicky stuff of like, oh, well, they're this kind of person. And I'm like, I'm 16 years old trying to find who I am. And I'm like, well, if my dad's like that and I look up to my dad, then does that mean I'm like that too? And so, yeah, definitely there is some cases where the identity comes from the parent and the other one's just bashing them all the time about it.
Like as a teen and young adult, because you're 18, Sidney, so you're a young adult. Like how, you know, from a kid's perspective, like, did you say anything, or was there anything that you didn't say that you wanted to say, or, you know, how did you go about processing that, and how do you think kids process that, like, whenever it's negative?
Yeah, absolutely. There was plenty I wanted to say, but I just didn't know how to because, like, in a divorce situation, the kids have very little control, if any at all.
Yeah.
And so in most cases, it was like my mom or my dad saying something, and I'm just sitting here listening because I'm like, what do I say? They'll be like, no, you're not. You don't know who they actually are. I'm like, okay, I guess not. And I'm just sitting here. I'm like, well, they're my mom. They're my dad.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know what to say. And so you kind of just sit there and take it. And it can, in some cases, even be borderline verbal abuse because you're hearing so much and you don't know what to do. You're just sitting there. You're like, okay, cool, I guess. And there's there's so much that goes along with that.
Do you feel that kids fear saying anything or standing up for the other parent out of fear that the parent who is saying the negative things is going to treat them differently or get mad at them or
Yeah, absolutely. It could show favoritism. So if my mom said something and I defended my dad, she'd be like, "Oh, well, if you liked him, then just go stay with him all the time." Da 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 da. You know, it's just the same thing. It's like I'm not trying to play favorites. I'm not. I'm just you're being unfair.
Yeah.
You're not listening and thinking that, well, I am half that person. And so I do take these things eventually like seriously because that is me.
How do you feel like that like emotionally and psychologically affects kids?
Oh, let me think about this one for a sec. Wow. It probably just it leaves basically bridges burned where there should have been communication between that. Because if your parent has a problem with your other parent, they should not be telling you about it.
Yeah.
You are not the messenger for that stuff.
Yeah.
And most of the time they don't have anybody to talk to about it. I recommend therapy. It's great. But like, most of the time they don't have anybody to say that to. And in some cases, some parents want the other parent to hear it.
Yeah.
They're like, you know what? I think this about them and I want to make sure they know it. So I'm going to tell our kid.
Yeah.
And then the kid's like, well, I heard this from mom. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And then that when you go to that other parent's house, they're like so taken back of why do you have an attitude? It's like, well, because I've been hearing this all week.
Yeah.
And so definitely watching what you say around your kid is like big because that's going to later down the line cause that kid, like you said, emotional and psychological like problems.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I don't know how to healthily communicate that. I don't know what to say to certain situations because I was told if I don't like somebody, I'm just going to tell somebody's friend and then they're going to tell them and they're going to know I don't like them.
Yeah.
That's eventually what that causes in some cases.
Yeah. Well, and it's all unhealthy, right? It's
Right.
maladaptive. It's bad coping and, and it's just bad behavior and then you don't know how to have healthy relationships, moving forward or how to communicate in a healthy way.
Right.
So that's good. What's your next?
My next bulletin here is
bullet here.
being unwilling to talk to the other parent. Just being shut off. You're like, you know what? I divorced them. I don't care what they have to say. I don't care. If you have kids, you have to care. You absolutely have to care because that is your kid's other half. It's like you may not want anything to do with them. You're like, I don't care what kind of life they're living. I could care less. But at the end of the day, your kid still has to go to that house.
Yeah.
And still, your kid is still getting influenced by that person.
Yeah.
So don't be cut off or like completely closed off to that other person.
Yeah.
Because you do share a kid.
Yeah.
And that person was still a part of your life for at least a year. At least a year. And so definitely on the baseline, we said this last podcast, try to communicate at least on the baseline of you have a kid together.
Yeah.
Let it be, if it has to be about anything, just let it be about the kid.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, how was your day at work? It doesn't have to be like that. Or maybe it will be. Some people are great at co-parenting.
Yeah.
But at least have that conversation with them and be open to communication with them based on your kids. Because those are your kids.
Yeah.
Not just yours, not just theirs. It's y'all's kids.
Yeah.
So
no, that's so good. Love that. What's the next one?
Next bulletin. This is a personal kind of nitpicky thing. Your time versus my time.
Ooh, that's a really good one.
I can talk about this forever.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it is your kid's time. And I know you have certain custodies. Like I had week on, week off between my parents. My mom had primary custody of my brother. So it was first, third, and fifth. He went to his dad's house.
Yeah.
So your time, my time, holidays. It doesn't get any easier, especially when you're in college, because then you're like, well, you need to decide it's because I go to Abilene. And so I have to drive 3 hours home.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, am I driving 3 hours or 2 hours from my dad's house? It's like, whose time is it? And I'm like, I've got to the point where I'm like, it's my time. It's my life.
Yeah.
And like we said, it's like all based on age. If your kid's like 5 years old, then there isn't much of them getting a choice in that.
Yeah.
But kids have such little, like, basically control in divorce situations that at least give them this. At least allow that conversation to happen and allow it to be an open stream of communication between you and your kid.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're going to tell you, your kids, just like we said, in the last podcast. Be hot.
Yeah.
Honest, open, and transparent.
Yeah.
Be hot with your kid.
Yeah.
And be like, you know what? I'm like, I would love to spend time with you here.
Yeah.
And I know you also have another parent. Remember that. You have another parent.
Yeah.
So you decide, how are you going to break it up? If it's okay if your kid wants to spend a little bit more time with one parent than the other.
Yeah.
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
And the whole making it equal between the parents is something that I've struggled with so much. I'm to the point where I'm counting down to the hour of how many hours I've spent at one parent versus the other.
Wow.
And I'm like, I shouldn't
That's
have.
stressful.
Yes, it is. I'm like, I shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
I'm like, just have that conversation and be like, listen, this is what works best for me, especially as your kids get older.
Yeah.
And they're in high school, in sports, and they have friends and they want to go hang out with their friends. It's like, how do you balance it all? It's like, it's very hard to. It's to have that conversation. There is no my time or your time. This should not have to be an argument.
You're giving them a voice too.
Right,
And,
yes.
and as kids grow older, we want to allow them to start making decisions for themselves. And obviously, like, there's borders around what that is. You know, like, you know, if you're, you know, you have to be a certain age to drive, or, you know, different things like that, you know, but giving them a voice in what they would prefer, or what they want to do. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
The last bulletin point.
Okay.
Favoriting your biological kids over your stepkids.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's not good stuff.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's not good stuff.
It's not good stuff. That's
Yeah.
the thing I say. But seriously, I'm like, if you are a step parent and you're joining families, because that's essentially what it is, you're joining families, and say your spouse has kids and you also are bringing kids into this.
Yeah.
Those kids are like, I don't even know who you are sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
my step siblings are in their 20s. The youngest is 23.
Yeah.
And I'm 18, freshman in college. Like,
Yeah.
there's a big gap between
Yes.
us. And so, like, yes, obviously your biological kids, you had those kids. Those are definitely your kids. But especially if your kids, all of the kids are younger, don't favor your kid. Don't be like, oh, well, I'm just taking my kid out to go get ice cream. No, because you as a step parent want to build that relationship with your step kids.
Yeah.
To have it all equal.
Yeah.
And obviously there's going to be a little bit difference because that is your DNA,
Sure,
basically, in
sure,
another
yeah,
human.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, all those kids are equal in God's eyes.
Yeah.
Like, they're all still his children. And I mean, you just have to remember that. It's like, you decided to, as a step parent, you decided to join your life with this other person. You also have to take on the responsibility of their kids and love them just as much as you love your own kids.
Yeah. What about for the step parent that's struggling with that? I mean, like, because we get a lot of people that phone in that they're like, my spouse or my parents don't treat my stepchildren the same as they do my biological. Like, from your perspective, what's like a first step that people could take, like, if they're really struggling in that?
Definitely give it over to God for starters. That's definitely, stay in prayer about it. Don't stop.
Yeah.
Literally don't stop, because it never ends.
Yeah.
Get into the word and, just basically get God's perspective on it.
Yeah.
Try to get as much information about that as you can.
Yeah.
And then have the conversation. It's not going to be an easy conversation, but have it.
Yeah.
Because it's one to be had.
Yeah.
Talk to, like you said, the grandparent of the stepkids. Be like, listen, I understand. And, like, maybe that even comes from a little bit of hurt of them getting remarried.
Yeah.
Maybe it comes from the actual spouse, not essentially the kids.
Yeah.
Have that conversation and be like, listen, I'm accepting these kids as my own because that is my responsibility now.
Yeah.
It's not for me to shun them and to make them feel less than, but it's for me to care about them.
Yeah.
Because I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
And these are your grandkids now. They might look a little different. They may not have my DNA, but they're your grandkids at the end of the day. Love them as you would my own because they are.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And that's, I think that's one that so many people struggle with, that, their spouse doesn't treat their children the same as they do their children. And and the kids, suffer in that as well. Like, how did that make you feel, or did you experience that where, like, you felt like there was favoritism and you were kind of the odd man out, so to speak?
Not essentially.
Yeah.
Background information on me is I'm technically an only child. So I'm the
yeah.
only kid between my parents, but I have a half brother, which is my mom's son.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to that stuff, there's a whole bunch of, like, family history that goes along with this. But I did feel like my brother was favored a little, just a little, because my mom she was a single mom.
Yeah.
And so she had my brother, and basically, they raised him.
Yeah.
Like my grandparents raised him since the day he came out, essentially.
Yeah.
And so it's always been that. It's like, okay, well, we have to take care of him a little extra because his dad's not in the picture.
Yeah.
And then I come along, my dad's in the picture. My dad kind of takes over the role of my brother's dad. For the longest time, my brother called my dad dad. And then his real dad. I was like, oh my gosh. But yeah, and so definitely a little bit, not to the certain extent that I would feel like we were talking about here.
Sure.
But there definitely is a little bit. In those more drastic situations, it can definitely cause like a sense of like not belonging within the family.
Yeah.
Because when you see your sibling or your step sibling getting so much attention, so much love, you're just like, what
about me?
Where am I at in this whole family thing?
Yeah.
And so definitely if you are a parent and you might not even notice that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because when you step into a blended situation, you want to get to know like your stepkids. You absolutely want to. Invite your own kids on that. Invite me like, you know what? I'm going to take, Joe and Bob out to your stepkids out to ice cream. Bring your own kid.
Yeah.
Because that's a bonding moment for them to better like further their relationship and build it stronger.
Yeah.
Because they're siblings now. And you are going to have that relationship of a parent figure to that kid.
Yeah.
But your kids that's their sibling.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different relationship in itself.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's good. Well, and these are all like, I love the traits that you were talking about for, unhealthy co-parenting or toxic co-parenting, whatever you want to call it. Because especially from a kid's perspective, like, Scott and I can sit there and talk from like an adult's perspective, but to hear from somebody who's experienced it and gone through it, and kind of like what what the big things that you experienced were, I think that's so good for any co-parent that's listening right now, because one, it can convict us and make us check our own heart. Like, dang, man, like we're doing this, like, oh my gosh, I think hearing from you in your heart that, hey, your kids could be wrestling with this when you do this. Absolutely. It can make them feel this way when you do this, or that this is going on in the co-parenting relationship. So I totally appreciate you just being open and honest and transparent, Sidney, to share that.
Be hot.
Be hot. Remember, guys, be hot.
Also, guys, do not forget, if you have a teen, ages, I guess, 12 to 18, even above, even below, me and Jersey do a lovely podcast for Blended Kingdom teens. We are so passionate about this because we want to be honest, open, and transparent with other teens about what it's like to go through this situation, knowing that you're not alone, that something that I've gone through or something that Jersey has gone through, we're here for you in that because we have a lot of experience to cover over in that whole situation. And we would love for your teen to be with us in that journey because we're all in this together. We're all blended kids, and it's so good to have a community in that. So absolutely go give your kid the link. We have an Instagram, a TikTok, and blendedkingdomteens.com. Give them the link to that because we want your kid to be involved in this community with us.
Again, guys, thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or on Audible, wherever you listen. Leave us a comment. We can't wait to hear from you and see you next week. Be blessed in all that you do.
Hey friends, so glad you were here with us today, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find more resources from Blended Kingdom Families at blendedkingdomfamilies.com. Join us again next time as we talk about more blended family topics. Be blessed in all that you do, and remember, nothing will be impossible with God.